The Lindt Cafe.
That was a terrible day. The morning of Lindt Cafe, we kicked off a job at 5 o'clock in the morning. We did a search warrant on a fellow, part of the Appleby investigation, and it was a terrorism financing brief. Did the search warrant, got the information, locked him up, knocked it over. And we went back to the office 9:30 and we're having this celebratory cup of coffee. Great job, boys. And we turned on 7 News and there was a picture of what they call the Shahada, which is the black and white flag that Mona's had. And it was up against the window and we read the teletype underneath saying, armed robbery gone wrong, hostages taken. Now, we knew straight away that was a Shahada, that's a terrorist flag. How you recruit people in business is exactly how you recruit people into terrorism. At any one time, we'd have 10 to 20 threats running at any one time. So when I go to bed for the last 20 years, there were threats. The first thing in the morning, I'm hearing the news, waiting for the bad news. That doesn't go away, and threats come and go. Now, what people don't understand is the majority of these threats dissipate. So very few will get through to fruition that we actually lock people up. So we have to act reasonably and due diligence. So a lot of them go, but you can't bank on that.
I would imagine you carry that burden a lot because, if you're not getting the result, it's just, more pressure.
So our measure of success was every day we didn't appear in the media, that's a successful day for CT.
The I Catch Killers podcast was a fresh start for me, as I left policing behind and started a new life. Over the years, we've laughed together, cried, and shared some powerful moments. Welcome to I Catch Killers.
Dr. Dave Gawel, welcome back to I Catch Killers.
Thank you.
In case people didn't listen to part one, they might think of you as an academic. So I just want to clarify, you're not just an academic, we'll call you an academic, but you also worked in the New South Wales Police for 35 years, I believe, and a large portion of that was as a counter-terrorist investigator. So
it was the last 20 years. And so what I did was, being in the authorities and on the front line of CT, we got direct access to data. Now, that data wasn't being used appropriately, and because of the classification of that material, it couldn't be disseminated to other academics. So there was a need there to conduct research with real data to get real results. So that's where I figured out. I figured out that if I could understand the world of academia, I could apply this data to the problems we're facing and come up with solutions, which in essence is what the book is about. It's a series of solutions.
Congratulations to you, Dave, because it's a powerful tool to have those both sides of the practical side, working in the field, and also the academic side, and bringing them together, as our good mate Nick identified. Now, in part one, there was one thing that I should have raised, because I was watching your speech in researching for the podcast here for 2015 Police Officer of the Year, Rotary Police Officer of the Year, and you made a very strong point that counter-terrorism is the greatest team sport in criminal investigations because so many people play a part. Do you want to just talk us through what that was about?
So look, we're both detectives. And detectives, because there's a high reliance on us from the prosecution aspect, there's a general acceptance that the detectives will run the brief because of that responsibility and burden placed on us. But we're only the tip of the spear. We're, a good intelligence or team of intelligence supports your work, and a lot of them go unsung heroes. And in the CT world, they're security intelligence agencies or spies. Now, here are some fantastic people that do great work that never hear or see the light of day because of the nature of their work. We rely on surveillance. The surveillance teams, we flog them to pillar and post to get us results. They work around the clock and get us product that gets us over the line for our briefs. Our tactical boys, that we spoke a little bit about, Penn Dennis, they're always on call, and we put them in horrendous circumstances with very minimal time to prepare, and they never say no. They always stand up. Our techs, they walk around and put devices in and do things that we could never do. And in the CT space, there's an area that we really took off on, and that was cyber operations. So very early on in JCT, we realised that our crooks weren't using phones anymore. They were using internet and data. So we had to change the way we did business. And I remember I put a business case up to my then commander and tried to get some money to set up a cyber operations team, and basically got laughed at. And I was told I could set one up, but I had to fund it with no funding. I had there's a guy there, James Short, one of the world's best CT cyber operators, Sophie, and a really good team there, put together with some of the guys from the AFP. So what we did was we started scrounging, and we went to the exhibit sergeant at Surrey Hills Police Station, found a couple of old servers they were going to destroy, they gave them to us, gifted them to us. We got some computers that were second-hand, bought ourselves some online, mobile data lines, and away we went. That team grew to be one of the best teams at that time throughout the country. In fact, the Americans, the Germans, the Brits, the French would come to us to do work in this region in the cyber online space. Yeah. And that was a real credit, a real feather in their cap. Never been done before. We were at that stage, at world best standard, best practice.
Well, I like the fact that you pay homage to all the people that play a part in the investigations. And the first one you did was intelligence officers. I honestly believe an intelligence officer is worth 3 good detectives. If you get 1 good intel officer, it can make so much difference, especially if you're leading an investigation. If you've got someone you can rely on that can receive all the information, which is overwhelming, dissect the information and analyse what's going on, and then give you a report on it, makes a world of difference.
Look, not only is my wife an intel.
Well, this will get you in the good books at home. So shout out to Fiona. Listen to what Dave's saying.
They're worth their weight in gold. And then when you get them from other agencies and they've got access to more extensive databases, the amount of information you can pull in one time. So when we're at the JCT, we had Commonwealth databases, national security databases, police databases from around the country, databases from other law enforcement agencies, and then the Crime Commission, those other agencies. That was a tremendous engine that we could get information in real time. Yeah. And that made us... And so one of the beauties about, and we'll hopefully get into, one of the things about what's different about CT is you have to make good, informed decisions. In fact, half the book talks about the decisions because it is a pivotal process. Yeah. You can't make any good decisions without good information.
Yeah, well, we'll talk on that decision-making process a little bit later on because it is crucial to the type of work. But we were talking in part 1 about threats, and the threats shift. Is there a shifting threat?
So CT is a shallow pool. Yeah. There's a lot of people with a lot of functions in there, and there's a lot of... It's very shallow. The only way CT works is that if everyone stays in their lane. And what that means is that you stay in your lane, and when the job goes from your lane to another lane, that threat shifts to the next team or the next discipline. Example, if I look at SEALs was the plot to blow up the airline passenger. Yep. When we initially got that information, that was intelligence-led, and they owned that lane. Then when we found out that the threat was real, that threat was shifted to the investigators. Yeah. When the investigators built up a brief of evidence, the threat was then shifted to the tactical team that arrested them. Yeah. Once the tactical team had done their job, that threat was shifted back to the investigators to get the brief together. Okay. Now that's within a team. Now you then multiply that by multiple government, state, national, international agencies. That threat shifting is happening all through the lifespan of investigation. What happens is that if you give certain information or you don't give information, you shifted the threat, either intentionally or unintentionally. The ownership of that is onto another organisation. And that is a real, a crux and a cause of great problems within the CT space of threat shifting. And a lot of relationships have broken down because people have, either through neglect or not thinking about the consequences, shifted threat under other agencies, which wasn't appropriate.
Okay, just on that, and I understand what you're saying there. When I was reading your book, when you first mentioned stay in your lane, I thought, sometimes with investigations, I like the uniform cop that thinks outside the square and go, hey, boss, have you considered this or whatever? But you think it's paramount in the space of counter-terrorism investigation, everyone knows their role, stick to those lanes?
It works. So it's a choreographed...
Because I suppose because there's many more dynamics.
It's a choreographed dance.
Yeah.
And it's not a bad analogy. We all have specialities, and we do that, and that enriches the next person along the line. Okay. And so we all feed into each other. Now, when you start taking ownership of things that's not your lane, that's when the lanes become muddy and the ownership gets mixed up.
So by way of an example, so we break it down so people understand, an intelligence officer that's, I'm curious what this person would have to say, makes a call. This is an extreme, makes a call to that person, and I made this inquiry. No, that should be for the investigation group.
So exactly. So let's say an intello gets some information and then goes outside their lane and contacts another agency.
Yes.
Right, and so that other agency is now bought in.
Yeah.
Right, so they're now coming in and doing their job. Now, they haven't been briefed yet. Now, that may not have been briefed because so we do formal briefings.
Yeah.
Those briefings take time to prepare. So they've all of a sudden bought into a job that they're not a party to yet. So all of a sudden they start reporting, and so there's now 2 or 3 different streams to government. So government is getting 2 different stories about what's going on, and information. We start developing an area where we call it assumed facts, where someone says something, and because there's multiple streams, that becomes the fact, and it's not. It fails. Right? So it really needs to be clear, and those lanes and those communication lanes need to be clear. One of the greatest things I find, or one of the greatest failings, is that, you know, in a normal day, everyone's quite calm and they go, these are communication paths. When a CT incident happens, there is a thirst for information that is unquenchable.
Yeah.
People want it. Now, some people panic and start giving briefing outside of processes, and that causes the breakdown.
Dave, I saw that, and it's been discussed at ad nauseum. But the Lindt Cafe, that
100%.
I was watching people react. I'm thinking, you're not handling this well on different things, and it was probably as sad as it was such a tragedy, that whole set of circumstances. I think we learnt a lot from that one experience.
Look, we did. Look, that was a terrible day.
Yeah.
And my role on that day, so I had the task. So go back, the morning of Lindt Cafe, we kicked off a job at 5 o'clock in the morning. We did a search warrant on a fellow, part of the Appleby investigation, and it was a terrorism financing brief. Did the search warrant, got the information, locked him up, knocked it over. And we went back to the office 9:30, and we're having this celebratory cup of coffee. Great job, boys. And we turned on Sky 7 News, and there was a picture of what they call the Shahada, which is the black and white flag that Monas had. And it was up against the window, and we read the teletype underneath saying, "Armed robbery gone wrong, hostages taken." Now, we knew straight away that was a Shahada. That's a terrorist flag. So it was in that opportunity that we started making the calls. This is a terrorist event. So normally we wait to receive the call. In this instance, we were briefing up saying, this is what's happening here. So then we went into an investigative pattern, and my task in the day was to identify who the hostages were and who the offender was. Now, that might seem really simple, but random people in a cafe in the heart of Sydney just before Christmas, I think there was probably, we had about 1,000 people were ringing up saying, I can't contact my brother. I haven't seen my sister. My auntie went into the city. So if people couldn't contact someone, there was the assumption they were there. So we had to really slowly dissect through all those people who was and wasn't there. We used all our technical capabilities, all those tricky methodologies that we had, and then we had to identify the shooter.
I remember from the first time I heard it was, we were watching it in the homicide office, and one of the female detectives said, "Man, Monas."
Right.
She knew her.
Knew
him.
Yeah. So and she did contact us, and we took it down. So now this is a confusing thing, right? So if I go back to Islamic faith, there is a number of sects within the Islamic faith. The 2 predominant sects would be Sunni and Shia.
Yeah.
Now, Man Monas purported to be a person of high ranking within the Shia community. Islamic State, for those that aren't aware, is a Sunni-based group.
Yeah.
We don't see we see people crossing from Christianity to Muslim, from Muslim to Orthodox, all that. We don't see the crossing over between Sunni and Shia. It's a real rare occasion. So he was on the list, but at the bottom, because he wasn't there. We also had the problem that he had the Shahida. Now, those that know what the Shahida is, that was the flag for bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. He was purporting to be representing Islamic State. They had a different flag. Yeah. Islamic State and Al-Qaeda were at war with each other. They were killing each other in Syria. Yeah. So We've got a guy. He's got a guy saying I'm one group, but I've got the wrong flag. So there was all these confusing things. So the story wasn't making sense to us. So whilst he was on the list, we just had to work through. Yeah. And again, we talk about the value of intelligence. They went through some Facebook pages. They found a photograph of a rally. He'd only just recently converted to Sunni, which we weren't aware of at the time. There was a rally that he was at with Hezbollah Tahrir. He had a particular bandana on his head on the soldier of Muhammad that he was wearing at the time at Lindt Cafe, and that was the critical point that we could say, right, now we've got who it is, now we can relay that to the negs, the negotiators, and they can start trying to negotiate with a person to whom they know. Because up until that point, we'd investigated Man Monis for 8 years, so we knew him very, very well.
Yeah. No, it was an interesting one, and it was a way for all of us have to switch on and see how we operated. And I think a lot was learnt from that, which it should. When the pressure's on, the mistakes are made, or people react a certain way. But I think it ironed out a few faults on the way that.
Look, it did. A lot of false chain of command, decision making. All those things come into play.
And in that one, what you've referenced, stay in your lane, was very important too, because there were so many people wanted to have a piece of it because it was the biggest thing in town, and everyone's on the phone running around. Yeah,
so we had, and everyone does. It's a slip. You slip into, I can do this, but that's not what you're there to do. Yeah. And in doing that, you dilute the process and you get in the way. Look, it was a great learning process. We learned a lot, so that's where we developed the concept of the strands of radicalisation out of that. We also looked at reception centres for witnesses and families.
Yeah, important.
So one of the failings, and one of the main failings in my career is that terrorism uses fear and violence as their main tools. That manifests into victims. So terrorism doesn't occur without victims. And what probably we need to do is look more at a victim-centric approach. And Lindt showed us that we failed that. We failed both the families in that regard and those that were coming out and the witnesses. Yeah. So we started to develop better protocols for that. And I think that was, again, taking it further and, again, maturing in this space. We're all maturing. Yeah. And so you don't learn it in a hurry, but as we slowly go through it, we get better and better at it.
Well, it's something I've learnt here in the podcast, like speaking to Peter Moroney and yourself and going through the book. It has been a learning process. It's just changed. We've had to adopt a new way of policing, a new strand of policing.
It's a new strand of policing. So just in investigations in CT, we've got 3 different types. Now, there's investigations. Well, in CT, there's reactive investigations, there's proactive investigations, and there's preventative investigations. Yeah. These are 3 separate disciplines that have just emerged that we now have to master. Yeah. And then you overlay that with the intelligence, and intelligence is getting complicated as well. And then the dynamic nature of terrorism. Now, whilst it stays, the trends stay, the motivations and how they do business is constantly moving. I was constantly asked, Dave, why are you still there after 20 years? And so, because it never stopped. I would write a manual. So one of my jobs was to write training manuals. Yeah. I'd write a manual, and within 6 months, that manual was out of date and had to rewrite a new one because the environment had moved on.
Well, I know you were busy because you virtually disappeared, and whenever we saw you, you looked stressed.
I was always stressed.
And angry. So, you must have been doing something. I didn't think you were bludgeoning over there, but you just disappeared on us. Ideology, left and right. Let's talk through that.
So look, there's always been, and look, as long as I've been in CT, right wing, extreme right wing has always been there. Now, there is a miscomprehension that because right wing is based on hate, they hate the people they're opposed to, that it's worse than other forms of extremism. They're all equally as bad. The one constant in the world of ideological terrorism is if there's a rise in the right, there will be a corresponding rise in left wing, extreme left wing terrorism. So when I hear the ASIO DG talk about a rise in right wing, my next conversation is, well, what are you doing then about the left? Because if the right rises, so does the left. They
have
work
a relationship together.
And if the left rises, then the right comes up.
It makes sense when you're talking extreme views. Like if someone throws that up, there'll be a counter.
And the example we see if there's a Palestinian protest, we see a counter Israeli protest.
Yeah.
If there's an Israeli protest, there's a counter. It's the same process. It's the same dynamic, just in different ideologies.
A lot of what we hear is young males being caught up in it, and they're trying to prove themselves. They're probably more easy to influence than an older person, and the ones that some of the things that have played out in recent times, young males. And what happened out the front of our police headquarters, a young person. Do they deliberately get targeted because they're vulnerable, because they can be influenced?
Yeah, look, so in short, yes. Culturally, yes, they are.
Yeah.
Now, each particular ideology will have its nuances. So if you look at the culture, say, of Islamic culture, the males are probably the leading face outwardly, so therefore they will take responsibility. Now, that said, I am fully aware that females are radicalised and are just as big a part of the process as the males are.
Okay, talk us through that, because we don't. When the word terrorism comes to fore, we don't often relate it to the female.
No, and so what we find is that because of in the Islamic faith, they take a backward step. That in that regard is that they're not going to be forward thinking. They're not going to expose themselves as a male would. Now, that doesn't mean they don't agree with the ideology and they don't agree with the support.
Perhaps don't be able to have some influence.
I can remember during Pandanism we were listening to all these conversations, and all I can say is that there were individuals in those rooms, in those houses that were female, that were just as into the extreme ideology as the blokes.
Yeah.
And they many times were inspiring them and encouraging them to pursue what they wanted to do and pursue their goals.
Yeah.
And they'll take a sort of a secondary role in that aspect. Now you see, say in left wing, where it's a culturally different group, you will see a lot of females running the protests, stepping up and making those actions. And you also see that too in right wing. And political, again, whichever that goes, we see women involved in that as well. So whilst males seem to be the most prominent ones, females have their fair hand in it as well.
Do we look at it, I take on board what you're saying there, because it's just the perception with the males, and you've explained that. Do we ignore the risk that potential, let's say, white terrorists that have that type of extreme behaviour, that we don't see it? Because I'm talking generally here, but the community look at, okay, these terrorists, where are they from? They're from the Middle East or that type of thing. That's our thinking of terrorists. That's been ingrained into the general public, I think, whether it's an unconscious bias that we hold on to. But what about these white extremists? Do they offer the same sort of threat?
So look, each terrorist offers the same threat.
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't want to be glib, but it's like ice cream.
Yep.
Violence is like ice cream. We're only changing the flavour of the ice cream. It's still ice cream. Violence is still violence, regardless of the ideology.
Never thought we'd be talking about ice cream on I Catch Killers, Dave, but I'll run with you.
Run with me. So, what we see is that they're just as deadly.
Yeah.
They're just as dangerous. Now, what we're seeing, terrorism comes in what they call waves, and they're identified as the 4 waves at the moment.
Yep.
And at the moment we're in a religious phase, and that phase is coming out, and we're seeing the emergence of new left and right wing terrorism.
Okay.
So predominantly at the moment we're in the middle of religious terrorism, and in particular it's those that have a corrupted extreme interpretation of the Islamic faith. Now this is just a period in time.
Yeah.
So that if the modelling is true, that will start to dissipate, and those, as you call it, Anglo-Saxons or white-orientated terrorists will start to take more precedence or more prominence.
Yeah.
And then we'll see more of that. And hopefully when that occurs, we'll see more of a balanced position of what terrorism is. And it's not a Middle Eastern thing. It is a human thing, depending on their ideology.
I think that's an important point to bring up and get across, that we've got to look at it that way. I don't know about the ice cream analogy, but I'll sit on that. Which colour did you prefer? With
vanilla.
All right, let's talk about recruitment. The way that as law enforcement you can stop recruitment. Now you talked early in part 1 about religious leaders come out and support it. How can we stop people being recruited?
So recruitment's like recruitment is the basis, and future success of any organisation is based on recruitment. There's 1,000 different models about recruitment, and all those people that are in recruitment agencies, how you recruit people in business is exactly how you recruit people into terrorism. The only difference here is that we're recruiting people into high-risk activity. So therefore, there must be a reward. So, they're looking at those stages of how do I get the reward for that person. So they'll use tricks like noble cause. It's for the greater good of humanity. It's for your salvation of your soul and salvation of your family's soul. It'll be, you're doing the right thing by another minority group. So they will look for those motivations to do it. Now, recruitment has its own set of indicators, and they happen in parallel with radicalisation. They happen at the same time, and a lot of the processes cross over. One of the absolutes in both radicalisation and recruitment is the presence of a corruptor, the person pulling the strings.
Okay.
Now, that could be in person, that could be online, it could be by any form of communication, but that presence of that corruptor. Now, what we see is that once the person is, they look at frame alignment, that is, get the person to acknowledge and their thought process agrees with the processes of the group, and then through the process of persuasion, the person decides to join the group and get accepted by the group, the recruitment process ceases.
Right.
But the radicalisation process continues. The radicalisation is an infinite issue. It doesn't go away. It ebbs and flows. People's level of radicalisation will go up and down according on how their life is going and how it's being managed. So if we look at terrorism, and I get a little bit academic here, it is a complex, infinite problem. So that when I identify, in this instance, Gary Jubelin as a terrorist suspect, you never go away. You're always there. And the complexity, because you're an individual, you get influenced by people in the studio, your home life, ex-colleagues.
Something's going bad.
All those little threads are pulling on you that impact on you that make you unique.
Yeah.
So that complexity together with the infinite side of it makes this a real challenging environment to police.
No, it's fascinating, the depth of it. I want to raise another thing, and I've got the heading, public, do they play a part in the fight against terrorism? I want to bring out a quote from your book. Terrorism has evolved, expanding the responsibilities of its counteraction beyond just law enforcement and security intelligence agencies, to include all entities in the public and private sector. The prevailing principle now asserts that counter-terrorism is shared responsibility of government and the community at large. Okay, I get where you're coming from there, but can we break that down?
So very simply, you, me, and every one of your listeners is part of the process. Yeah. It's no longer a police matter. It's no longer a security intelligence matter. We all play a role. We all see things, the old saying, see something, say something. There is no truer saying in this world. If something is unusual, we should be reporting it. If, I've got concerns about my neighbour, I should be making an effort. I should be inquiring. This is part of being part of the community. Yeah. The old saying that you can't arrest your way out of a problem is true. Also, you can't rely on, we can't be everywhere. There's 8 million people in New South Wales alone. We don't have those resources to be there. So as a community, we need to band together. And that's what that process is.
And in saying that, the type of things, without, so you're not inundated with calls, but if there's something that doesn't seem quite right, you're saying to the public, well, look, if you've got doubts about it, it doesn't hurt to pick the phone up and make a call, pass the information on. So
the best test, if it doesn't look right, it's probably not, and make a call. Yeah. There's a thing, we call it unknown knowns. That is, we don't know why we know something. And part of anticipation. There's a reason when you and I walk in a room and we see a crook, that we don't know is a crook, but our hairs will stand on the back of our neck. He's doing something or she's doing something that indicates to us this person is someone I can't be trusted.
Up to no good.
So when you get that feeling, there's a basis for it. There really is. Yeah. And that intuition that you feel, maybe you should act on that. And I encourage people they should. Not that I want to see the phone lines melted down, but if you think you've got information, make the call. The authorities, just think if you don't make the call and something happens, it's you that's got to look at yourself in the mirror the next day and for the rest of your life.
And I think it's fair to say, and I'd use this when we're appealing to the public with homicide investigations, it's like a jigsaw, putting together a jigsaw, and some small little part on its own doesn't have any relevance. But if you pass that information on, you might be the third or fourth person that's called about that person.
So true. So we took at even we'll talk about Man Monis. Just prior to Lindt Cafe, he made a post on Facebook, and it was a provocative post.
Yeah.
Now I think there was 10 people that rang the police and reported it. Now we looked at that as a result of that. So it's that action, direct action, causes a reaction.
Yeah.
So when I was there, and again, I'm not there, but if someone was prepared to give me information, I was prepared to look into it.
Yeah.
So if you're prepared to make the call, it is my understanding that they will make an effort to look into that and assess that on its merit.
Yeah. No, we should encourage people to do it. It's not dissimilar to, in the basic form of neighbourhood watch. Someone's wandering around the street that doesn't look like they belong here.
That's exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. And it works.
Simple as that. Okay. I'm interested in the ratings. When they say, from the government announces the risk of terrorism, a terrorism attack is high, low, or whatever. What do they base that on?
So the AIC, which is the Australian Intelligence Community, they're our intelligence agency. So that's ASIO, ASIS, ONA, Defence, Signals Directorate, and a myriad of other government agencies that all have alphabetic, names. They get together and they determine that threat process. Now, the brokerage house, or the front of office, one of their words, is ASIO, and they will put that rating up. And see, at the moment, where it's possible.
Yeah.
Now, if we look, so that means that Australia remains a potential target.
Okay.
Now, given recent events in Gaza, in Wakeley, the Six, and in Perth, I think we're probably moving beyond what possible is, and probably moving to and it's not my job, but it would probably have to review that. Now that has ramifications both nationally and internationally. So it's a big deal, and it's something that government and the intelligence agencies spend a lot of resources on to determine that and to make sure they get that balance right. Yeah. So it's not fright night, yet it's informative so the community is forewarned and armed to make appropriate decisions.
Yeah. Well, when you say it's not fright night, when you look at what the aim of terrorism is to cause concern in the communities, you don't want everyone to live in fear constantly.
No, and if we do, then they
win.
They win.
Yeah.
And that's the tool. That's why it's done. So it's a marketing ploy to be front of mind, and that creates the momentum for them to further their cause.
Yeah.
And that's a travesty that we let that happen.
What's some of the what you would consider significant terrorist acts that have occurred in Australia? That people often, we forget things, we move on from things pretty quickly. But the type of terrorist incidents that occurred that,
So look, we'll go back. The Castle Hill uprising, I think, in 1805. Where,
like your history here, Dave.
15 convicts were tried to uprise against the government. 15 convicts were killed. 9 were hung. We had the shooting of Royal Prince Alfred.
Yep.
Now he was shot at Clontarf, shot in the back. That attack and his treatment had a public subscription that resulted in the establishment of the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. So it impacts on our society. In 1978, we had the Hilton bombing.
Yeah.
That created the redrafting of the ASIO Act and the establishment of the AFP in the format that we see it today. We've had numerous bombings throughout the time. We saw Pendennis. Now, Pendennis was a major watershed moment where a couple of days, and this is the interesting part, I think 2 or 3 days before we went to resolution, they had to recall government to change the legislation because it didn't work.
Yeah.
So we did that. One of the other major attacks.
And just on in case people haven't heard the podcast I did with Peter Moroney, Pendennis, a couple of things that he was saying about that you came across this group that were planning something and you had to move because it was getting inevitable, and it was not just based here in New South Wales, there was connections down in Victoria. But one thing that I found chilling was that 7,000 rounds of ammunition were found.
Actually, I was looking at Pendennis the other day, and look, we got 38,000 rounds. Yeah. We got 40 firearms. They attempted to purchase over 850 kilograms of chemicals that make bombs.
Yeah.
We found we couldn't find a handful of other guns and rifles, and we couldn't find 7 rocket launchers.
Yeah.
So they had access to this material. It's frightening what they could get access to and what they were trying to.
And it could have been catastrophic.
Could have been, and so we learned a lot from that. So what we learnt from Pendennis is initially Pete Moroney and a guy called Nick Reed come to me after Pendennis and said, Dave, we need a terrorism training course. So we did. We established the New South Wales Terrorism Training Course as a direct result of Pendennis. And our first manual that we wrote was in essence a POA of what went wrong in Pendennis. Yeah. Don't do this again. So our training then evolved, and then we realised the importance of decision making. So we then put that in a national framework under the Australian New Zealand Counter-Terrorism Committee and their training regime. So it really was a catalyst for us to take it up a notch and actually get better at our business.
Yeah. Well, we always should evolve and improve. But when you talk decision making, you say that a lot because that's crucial to counter-terrorism work.
So you get. It's one of the only areas in policing, no, to be fair, all areas of policing get scrutinised fairly heavily, but it's one of the only areas where the rationale for why I made decisions and when I made decisions, I've never seen that level of scrutiny outside of the CT space. Yeah. And the difference between a good CT operator and a bad one is one that makes good decisions in poor environments. And what we did is we developed a framework that would help us to enhance our decision-making process and also protect us when that occurred. So what we did, we're speaking with our colleagues from London Met, and there was a senior officer there, and a couple of years ago, well, a decade or so ago, after the 7/7 bombings, they received information that there was another terrorist attack about to occur. And they had a surveillance team, and a suspect walked out of the premises, had a striking appearance to the suspect that had been nominated that was about to do a terrorist attack. He clocked that he was being surveilled and then decamped. The police gave chase, asked for the order, and the person was shot in fear that he was about to do another terrorist attack on the London subway.
I remember that.
Now, in this instance, this individual was innocent.
Yeah, he didn't have a ticket.
This is a horrendous act, a tragic set of circumstances. But we spoke to the police and they told us about their decision-making model, that it was... But when you looked at all the circumstances, it was a good decision with a bad outcome, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, Dave, and I do understand what you're saying and the level that you're talking at in counter-terrorism, but that was the same with homicide. I make decisions. They're always informed decisions, the decisions that I made, and I could justify it because I could be sure as hell I'd be in the witness box 5 years down the track, or there'd be some inquiry, why did you do this, why did you do that? And the same would have to apply.
And a good decision doesn't always meet a great outcome.
No.
And that's what you've got to, and you've got to appreciate that. Yeah. That I could make the world's best decision with a terrible outcome. That's the luck of the draw.
We were looking at a group of people that contract killers, and they ended up, when we're looking, they've killed someone else. But I'm comfortable with all the decisions that were made based on the information that we had at the time. Benefit, the hindsight's a wonderful benefit, but the
you don't have that. Don't have that luxury.
You don't have that luxury. So I can understand, but it is crucial. Jesus, I wouldn't want to be the person that ignored something, a red flag, and you just flicked it. No, nothing to see here.
And that's the weight. That's the burden upon CT operators.
I see it. I feel it. And how did you lasted probably as long as anyone has in that field? How did you manage that burden? Because
it's not easy. It's not easy.
Yeah.
And then that would probably one would suggest had something to do with my retirement.
Yeah.
But it's a constant. You're always on, and you're seeking professional help. You're seeing psychologists and others to go, how do we manage the burden we're under? Because there's a burden of expectation that you're not going to fail. The Americans call it a zero fail operation. Yeah. Now that's aspirational, because if we accept that terrorism is a crime, we haven't stopped any crime type yet. So the perception that we're going to be able to stop terrorism is just unrealistic. Yeah. So that burden, and what we do is that we reverse the burden of responsibility again on our operators, so that we know that if we fail, we will be held accountable. And that really starts ratcheting it up, and that makes for an unhealthy environment, but that's the nature of the beast.
How do you, I would imagine how, when I was under pressure, I tried to share the pressure in that having people, having these briefings, not just briefings where you're sitting down having a coffee for no reason, getting everyone's thoughts. So when you make that decision, you've got all the information. If you're the boss, you happen to be the one that's got to sign off on it. You make the final decision. But I found it helped me in the pressure spots where at least I've sought counsel or other people's views, and then take it all in and then sit with my decision.
So we go back to threat ownership there. And so in a multi-agency approach, we'd have to sit there in a room and go, do you have any more information? And then, so that's what we've got, and we'd have to document that. So we could say at this point in time that this decision is made, this is what we know. So if that changes, so let's say an agency comes back later and says, oh, we forgot to tell you about this. Well, that wasn't on the table. So we can only do what we can. It's not a perfect model, but given the dynamic nature, it's the only way that will work. And so that's that corroboration with your colleagues and teams, and that's when the beauty of joint agencies come together. And whilst they're challenging working with other agencies, the operational benefits and efficiencies outstrip the challenges.
Well, probably more so than any sort of law enforcement, the counter-terrorism has to work with all those other agencies. And I've heard the whingers come out with, this person working with that person, but it's needed, isn't it? It's in this environment.
It's just that has to be done.
Any other way. Do you think we're set up well for our counter-terrorism investigation in this country?
Okay, so I do. When I left, one of my major roles was training and development. When we saw opportunities, we took it. We endeavoured to train as many people as we could and upskill them as best we could. So I'm aware that people have taken over my role since I've left. I have every confidence in their abilities. These are really good operators. And they believe in the cause. They believe in stopping terrorism, public safety. So I think, we are in a good place.
And you got to have that time, like this rotation policy that they brought in. I never agreed with it or understood it in New South Wales Police. Like homicide, I learnt something every day. But I think in counter-terrorism, you can't replace years and years of experience.
And nor should we. We need to tap into that and realise that, it's the lessons you learnt from 10 years ago are applicable today. It takes you years before you become just understanding the dynamics of the different cultures that are involved. It takes a long time to appreciate. And then putting that within a criminal framework, an intelligence framework, it's incredibly complicated. So I don't understand the rotation policy. It's inefficient to the process, and I think that's one of the failings in a number of agencies that rotate people through to simply go
to get
on the CV. My CV's done. I've done CT. That's crazy. There should be consideration that it is a career path, and if you go down that path,
you're a specialist.
That's where you go. And rather than punishing specialists, we should be encouraging it.
100%, Dave, and I'm comfortable. I think we've both earned the right to talk about that and offer an opinion on that. I'm going to offer another opinion at the risk of embarrassing you and probably getting us both into trouble, or someone will whinge. This book, I've read it. I'm an experienced major crime investigator. I know the value of something like that. I understand the world that you operate in. Why isn't this being purchased for every officer? And this is not, I'm not going to get you into trouble here, Dave, but I'm saying that this has just come up in my thought process, not Dave, and he certainly didn't ask me to spruik his book. But it seems like a must read. If you're going to don't even answer yet, let me get in the trouble, then you can answer. If you're going to work in counter-terrorism, you have to read this book. Have to.
Well, thanks. I'm glad you read it. I find it can be a little bit tedious because there's a lot of detail. But no, thank you for those comments. And look, and that's what it's written for. It's written for to increase the knowledge of both the private sector and public sector. And that's the authorities, that's police. Look, there's application here in this book. So if I'm working for, say, education, we see, if we're talking about children and juveniles in the current environment, well, they're at schools. Therefore, there's indicators there that we should be aware of and looking at potential flags. If I'm working for a corporation where they have mass gatherings. There's information there that can assist them. It does have some things in there that for practical application. It's been written for it to be practically applied. Because again, I want it to be useful. I didn't want it to be an academic piece.
It's not academic waffle that you lose interest in. It's practical, and it's something that you can use. And knowledge is power, and having that knowledge, it hardens the target. If everyone has this type of knowledge. But no, I just ask that, and I'm not trying to cause problems for you, and you haven't come on to promote this book. But why the hell aren't everyone reading that if they're working in counter-terrorism? I think it's a good book. Let's drift back to you now, Dave. You look back at your career. Are you glad you discovered counter-terrorism?
Oh, look, it's a passion, and look, to work in that environment with some incredibly talented people, dedicated. So you've spoken with Peter.
Yep.
We spoke at Moroney. All the people that he would have mentioned. I've worked with, our colleagues that we've worked with. Look, CT. It is one of those. It's like homicide.
Yeah.
You get involved and it becomes a passion, and you want to better the profession.
Yeah.
And CT, unfortunately, is just bigger than the police. It is in every aspect of our lives now. It's in the tertiary sector. It's in government sectors. It's in the private sector. It's in travel. Transport. In every aspect, this unfortunately is coming to bear.
Yeah.
And that's where that whole of community needs to embrace it, because everyone can be exposed to it. And so hopefully a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of information might help us along the way.
Yeah. And I say this, to work in a field like that, and the way I worked homicide, you've got to be passionate about the field that you're working in. And you can't do counter-terrorism just half in, half out. You got to fully commit. I look at you, how you've changed from the Dave Gawel I knew. Jesus, what's happened to you, Dave?
I'm a happy guy.
You've just gone into this completely. You've absorbed yourself into this world, and full credit to you. I know the sacrifices you make to do that in a career, but it needs to be done.
So it's one of those. So when you get to work with members of the security intelligence, look, it's different from law enforcement, and our relationships are different, and it becomes difficult because you've got certain obligations. There's legal obligations on us about what we can and can't say.
Yeah.
There's operational security. There's a lot of things that come into play, and that you've got to protect not only yourself but your other agency members.
Yeah.
It's intense. So again, I think I spoke that at any one time we'd have 10 to 20 threats running at any one time. So when I go to bed for the last 20 years, there was threats, and the first thing in the morning I'm hearing the news, waiting for the bad news.
Yeah.
What's happened? So that doesn't go away, and threats come and go. Now, what people don't understand is the majority of these threats dissipate.
Yeah.
So very few will get through to fruition that we actually lock people up.
Yeah.
So we have to act reasonably and due diligence. So a lot of them go, but you can't bank on that. You've got to run down each rabbit hole
and
to put it to bed.
sit on it, and the success is if it doesn't happen. Whereas,
So our measure...
And you would be... I would imagine you carry that burden a lot, because, if you're not getting the result, it's just, more pressure.
So our measure of success was every day we didn't appear in the media, that's a successful day for CT.
Yeah.
That was our thought process. So we didn't court the media, we wanted to avoid the media. And that was the process we had.
It's the work behind the scenes that keep the streets safe. I know in homicide, like we had to see a psychologist every 6 months or 12 months or whatever it was. Do they have the same thing on offer for you guys?
Yeah, so so what we did, so I'll go back to Pendennis.
Yeah.
We retrieved 4 terabytes of extremist material.
Yeah.
Now that is insane. Like this is just insane material, and unfortunately we have to go through that because there could be evidence of other offences, of other criminalities, of new plots. So unfortunately someone has to go through that, and we had a team of 10 people, 6 to 12 months going through this material. Now I was blasé, and this is something that I learned, that my people were becoming sick. They were becoming unwell, and I couldn't figure it out. And then I spent some time looking at these videos, and I got it. that we were damaging our people.
You lock someone in a room looking
and they're looking at horrendous... And so we had to develop processes. So we got the psychs in and we developed processes that we still have to view it, but how do we minimise the danger and that this isn't being taken home? This is not impacting on their family life. So we brought in psychometric tests. We brought in those regular counsellors. Yeah. We brought in little tricks of the trade where we allow people to, they could only see it for the first couple of hours of the day and then be engaged in other duties. So it cleared their mind.
Taking it home,
we've tried to put all these strategies, but at the end of the day, it's harmful material. It's a hazardous workplace. And that's one of the rubs. We have to look at it, and it does damage you. So it's that balancing act where we try to minimise that, but there's no other way around it. We have to view the material to see if there's evidence there.
Yeah. No, it's a tough gig. What are you doing since you've left the police? You've been doing some work.
So look, when I left, I hooked up with our old compadre, Mr. Cowdas. I went and gave work for him on a contract for 12 months with the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide.
That's another heavy thing, sir.
But
an important thing.
It's important work. What a challenging environment, and the team that Nick, the commissioners, Peggy Brown and James Douglas, fantastic commissioners doing wonderful work that I think addresses a national tragedy. I was happy to be part of that process. I only gave a small piece of work, but I wish them every success. They're in the process of finalising the report and making the recommendations, and I fully support the recommendations and the work that's come out because it is something that needs to be looked at and supported. So that was the last 12 months.
Okay. And the rest of the time you're just at home supporting Fiona?
Well, supporting my good wife. But look, what I have done, a very good colleague of mine and yours, Carolyn O'Hare, Detective Chief Inspector. Carolyn also is another CT nerd. And she identified, and we're talking about victim-centric approach. There's, if you remember about 25, 30 years ago, Martha Jabor set up a group called the Victims of Homicide Support Group, and they do wonderful work, and Martha has been a Trojan of taking that forward. Yep. And we've seen the establishment of other support groups. Now, we've recognised that terrorism is a crime, but it's a unique crime, and there's a lot of unique characteristics, and there is no group that support these people that are victims that experience this. Yep. So I'm working with Carolyn in the establishment of Victims of Terrorism Support Group, which hopefully will get up and running in August of this year.
That's worthwhile.
And look, that is, I think, is beneficial. I think that there's a benefit there. There is a gap that we need to support these people, and it's something that Carolyn and I are very passionate about.
And there's like Australian victims overseas of terrorism too. So you've got the families over here. I think that's worthwhile.
It's amazing. I've spoken to people, that were overseas and have witnessed terrorist attacks, and they've come home and never spoken to anyone. And I've sat down next to them, and they say, "What do you do?" And I tell them I'm in CT. Yeah. And next, they become emotionally upset because they start reliving the experience, and they've had no support, and they've had to do it on their own, and that we shouldn't be like that. We're better than that. So the opportunity to support them, I think, is wonderful.
Yeah. Well, again, it's an evolving process that we've got to understand this new thing.
We're maturing, and so like we do that now for traffic trauma, and we're seeing how that actually supporting these people helps them and then helps us in the future, that victim-centric approach, which is, I think, the direction we need to start heading towards.
Okay, good stuff. Well, Dave, you've upskilled me and educated me, and you've taken up my weekend reading your book. But
sorry about that.
No, I appreciate it. I'm thinking, this is our Dave who's written this. It's a detailed read, but it's a common sense and a practical thing, which I like. It's not you're not lost in the academic world. We've still got a little bit of you back in the old Major Crime Squad detective. But I just want to, all jokes aside, thank you for the work that you've done. I know the price that you've paid on doing the type of work that you've done, and the results that you guys do don't often get recognised. And it's a team approach. I'm not just talking about you individually. You don't get recognised because it doesn't hit the media because something's been prevented. So we know. I'm just saying to you, thanks for how hard you're working, and thanks for coming on I Catch Killers.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Cheers, Dave. It's really good catching up with an old friend. We sort of lost touch when he was working in the world of counter-terrorism, but Dr. Dave Gawel really is an expert in the field of counter-terrorism. I enjoyed the chat and enjoyed reading his book. I think it's a must for anyone that wants to involve themselves in the investigation of counter-terrorism. And as you know, I always like talking to ex-cops, so it was good catching up.